We're going to be making a money clip. Let's go over the contents. We have 2 heavy-duty magnets. We have 1mm Ritza tiger thread in black. We have 2 John James saddle needles. We have 3mm double-sided adhesive tape. We have a piece of double-sided adhesive. We have veg tan leather that is pre-cut and pre-punched. And we have chrome tan leather that is pre-cut and pre-punched. Now we're going to open these up and get started. Let's get familiar with the leather. It has a finished side and a rough side. If you're planning on doing any personalization to your project, you're going to want to put the personalization on the finished side and leave the rough side to be invisible. We're going to place our piece of leather finished side down so the rough side is facing up. We're going to take our double-sided adhesive tape and we're going to place it across the perimeter of our piece of leather. As we place this, we're going to want to be careful and place the outside edge of our adhesive tape aligned properly with the outside edge of our project. As we approach the edge, I'm just going to press down firmly and rip the tape and rotate our project and place another strip, rip, rotate our project, place tape down, rip, and set the excess off to the side. For the sake of marking, we're going to grab our scratch awl and keep it handy because we're going to be using it here in a moment. We're going to grab our magnets and we're going to place it as center as we can get it on the rough side of our leather. Our goal here is to make sure we have even distance on the left and right sides of the magnets. We're going to use a scratch awl to measure the distance from the pre-punched holes to the magnets on this edge of the leather. We want to be close but not too close. So that looks about right. I'm just going to take my scratch awl and I'm going to gently scratch around the magnet, leaving a marking on the leather. This is not going to damage our project and it won't be visible, but it's going to help us when we attach our magnets to the rough side of our leather. We're going to take our square of adhesive and we're just going to cut it in half. Scratch awls come in very handy when trying to remove the backer from adhesives and the double-sided tape, which we'll do in a minute. But we want to remove one side of the backing and just place it on the outside of our magnets. We want to make sure that they're stuck together because if you put adhesive on the wrong side of the magnet, they're not going to close properly. So make sure that your magnets are nicely stuck together. Now that we've applied our adhesive, I'm going to again take the scratch awl and we're going to peel off the back. Now before we place it down, we're going to make sure that we align it with the markings that we had made. We're going to press firm. We're going to be careful not to pull off the bottom magnet. We're just going to pull off the top one. Since that one is still intact, we're going to repeat that process on this side. So we're going to try and center it as much as possible. And we're going to try and make sure that our distance is about the width of the scratch awl from the edge. Once we're happy about its placement, we're going to use the scratch awl to mark the leather. Then we're going to remove this backer and place our magnet. Now, any leftover double-sided adhesive we have, we're just going to place a few little strips in the middle between our magnets. Now we're going to set this off to the side for a few minutes. We're going to grab the black piece of leather that is eventually going to be attached like this. This is chrome tan leather and it has a finished side and a rough side. The rough sides are going to be facing each other and the finished sides will be facing outward. This much thinner lining leather has a little bit of a stretch to it, and so I'm going to work it a little bit because while these pieces of leather are almost the exact same size, we're going to have to make up the difference in width to make it over the magnet. So we're just going to give it a little pull to make it a little bit wider, make it a little more supple. And now before we pull off any adhesive, we're just going to eye it and line it up. It is critical that we make sure that the pre-punched holes align with each other and stay that way. So we're just going to line it up edge to edge and make sure from our perspective that the sides will line up as well. Very small manipulations of the leather will help correct it. Now, once we're confident that they're going to line up properly, we're going to grip the black leather to the magnet with our thumb and kind of peel back. And all we want to remove is this top piece of adhesive. So what I like to do, making sure that that stays aligned, I'm going to peel it back with a scratch awl. I like to rub it over the double-sided adhesive and then give it a little poke and it peels right up. Now before we start pressing anything, we want to make sure that we are definitely aligned properly. Once I'm confident, from my perspective, I can see straight through both layers of leather's holes. I'm going to press the very edge lightly. And once all my holes are aligned, I'm going to be a little more firm with my press. The tape allows us to create a temporary bond before we end up stitching it. And now we're ready to flip up our leather and repeat the process, rubbing over the double-sided adhesive, giving it a little poke with the scratch awl, and peeling it upwards. I don't want to peel this up all the way. I'm going to come about halfway and fold it off to the side because we're going to attach a few holes at a time, giving it a little pull, making sure that our outside edges are aligning properly and that our holes are lining up. So we're going to give it a little pull, small manipulations to make sure that we're aligned properly. A couple holes at a time, and then press. The more times we allow the leathers to adhere to each other and then pull it off, it becomes less sticky and that bond becomes weaker. So we want to do it little by little and make sure that our holes are aligned properly. So we're going to stop once we hit the point where we had folded off our double-sided adhesive. And we're going to begin working on this side. So we're going to repeat the process again, where we rub a little bit, and then we're going to poke the adhesive and pull it up and fold it off to the side. We're going to align the 2 layers of leather, pulling when needed to align them properly, and we're going to press. Pull back a little bit more. Now we're going to remove the center backers from all 3. Now the backers are removed, but we're not going to press down on those. We're going to let the leather naturally fall to where it wants to once it's folded to adhere those, and then we'll press. We don't want to press them down as we're doing this process. So now we can continue to make sure that our holes are aligned. So we've made it a little more than halfway. Before we finish these sides, we're going to repeat the process on this top edge. So we're going to visually line it up, pull it as needed to get it to line up properly. We want to make sure that our edges align and our holes. Now that I'm confident, I'm going to pull off the backer. Carefully pinch together, a few holes at a time. Patience makes all the difference when it comes to leather work. So just be patient with it, and your end product will be something you can be proud of. Now that this edge is firmly attached, we can remove the rest of one of the side adhesives, but we're going to work from corner back down to the middle. So we're going to pull as needed and make sure that we align our holes, just a few at a time as needed. And as it meets back up, you should be able to see through every single hole that's double layered. And we're just going to flip back around, pull off the last bit. Make sure we can see through all of them. And then we'll gently, at this first fold, see how it helps push the leather down to that adhesive down there? It'll close. We're just going to press firmly to make sure the magnets connect. Over time, this leather is going to get used to the fact that it's supposed to be folded in half. And these magnets will align perfectly, and they will make 100% contact with each other. Right now, it's completely normal. If there's a little air gap between the back sides of the magnets, that'll fix itself. We'll just give everything a good press. And the main assembly is now complete. To create a permanent bond between our two leathers, we're going to utilize waxed thread and our 2 needles. These needles are blunt needles, which are preferable for this type of stitching. Their bluntness allows them to easily just guide through the pre-punched holes versus sharp needles, which are meant to punch through fabrics, leathers, any textile. This waxed thread is my absolute favorite. It is some of the strongest thread, and its wax is also excellent. A lot of threads have way too much wax on them, and they break as you're trying to pull stitches tight. It's obnoxious because it'll ruin your project. I've never had tiger thread snap on me, so all threads were not created equally, and this is my absolute favorite. So we're just going to unwind it, and we're going to grab the 2 ends. This stitch that we're about to do requires 2 needles, so we need both ends. And since this is a wax thread, all we need to do to get a nice sharp end of our thread to make it through the eye of the needle is to press firmly between thumb and forefinger and give it a little pull. We're going to grab our saddle needle and we're going to gently guide the thread through the eye and just pull some through. We're going to repeat that on the other end. Little pinch and pull. We're going to grab our needle, guide it through the eye, and pull. We are going to want to make sure that we pull these even distances through the eye. If the tail of our threads is not the same length, it will mess up our ability to finish stitching our project. So we're just going to pull. I'd pull about 10 inches and make sure they're even. They look pretty good. So then we're going to re-find our center. And then we'll begin stitching. To begin our stitch, we're going to go in through the finished side of the veg tan leather and come out through the black. We're just pulling through right now. We're going to grab both needles, double checking, making sure the tails are still the same length, which they are, and then we're going to pull the thread until we find the center of the thread. And I prefer to have the finished or outside of my projects on my right. So now I have 1 needle in each hand. And if you kind of pull a little bit, you just want to make sure that you refine that center. That center is important. It'll keep itself after this first stitch is started, but for right now, it's critical to make sure that our threads are even distances on each side. Now to begin, I'm just going to kind of grip the thread on the inside so I don't accidentally pull it. I'm going to come again, just in through the veg tan leather, and it's going to come out the black leather, and we're going to take the other needle that we've not stitched with, and we are going to overlap it through the same hole and come out the veg tan leather side. And we're just going to tug firmly. And here we have our beginning stitch. So with this needle that has ended up on the outside of our project, we're going to go right back in through the next hole up and pull. And we're going to take the other needle and come right back through. And then we're going to just pull firm. We're going to repeat this through every pre-punched hole. Now this stitch is not meant to be done one-handed. The needles actually work together in unison to stitch like this. So I'm going to throw this project on my stitch pony. I highly doubt that you have a stitching pony. If you do, great, use it. If you don't, what I tend to do, or what I did prior to getting a stitching pony, is I used to just tuck the product between my knees and stitch it while my knees were holding it together. It makes it so much easier to have the project held firm. So this is my stitching pony. And I'm just going to throw it in. Each time we add a stitch, we're going to start by putting the needle on the outside of the project in first, and then use the other needle to meet up in the same hole and push it through. Now, instead of trying to yank the needles out by their blunt ends each time, what I like to do is just grip the threads below the eyes and tuck them under the needle and push. This allows me to get the needles to pull outward without running the risk of stabbing myself. While these needles are blunt, you can absolutely poke yourself, draw blood, and to avoid that, I just press in with the threads and it angles the needles upward. So now that there's a good distance of needle to grip, I'm just going to take it and pull it through. And then pull tight. And repeat. In through the outside of the project, in through the inside, pull tight. If you feel like there's too much thread to be working with right now, you can shorten that thread by just pulling the tail evenly on each side. And as we add more stitches, this length of thread will shorten and we'll eventually need to make our tails a little bit shorter to give us more slack to work with. So we're just going to repeat this process through every pre-punch stitch hole. Normally stitching ponies are held firm because you're sitting on part of them, but for the sake of filming, I'm just letting mine kind of angle and rest on my table, which is why it's not staying still like it should. I would have made it to this edge. I'm going to rotate. Now the distance on my tail is now long enough to get stuck in my stitch, so I'm going to shorten my tail by pulling my needle, giving myself more room to stitch. I'm going to do that evenly on both needles and continue. Now as we approach this very last stitch, we are going to go through that very first hole that we had gone through. We're going to come through all the way. And then we're going to pause. So we've gone around and stitched through every hole. And now we have threads dangling out of each side. Now to finish our stitch, and in order to get it to where we don't have any visible threads hanging out of one side or the other, we're going to grab our scratch-all and we're going to break the bond right either above or below that stitch hole that we're coming out of. So we're going to want to pick if we're going to go one stitch up or one stitch down. It doesn't really matter. So I'm going to go one stitch up. So I'm just going to poke through carefully, not to pierce through the leather, but I just want to break the bond so the needle has an easier time coming out between the two layers, because that's where we're going to aim for and end up having the needles come out. So I'm going to break that bond. We're going to go in through the hole, but instead of coming out the other side, we're going to come out between the two different layers of leather. And we're just going to pull. We're going to pull firm and repeat that on the veg tan side. We're going to go up one stitch again. We're going to push a little bit through, not all the way to where our needle's coming out the black, because we want to angle and push through and end up in between the two layers of leather, like so. Now we don't have visible overhang. And now to make our threads easier to tie off, I'm just going to pull about 12 inches away from our project. I'm going to grab thread snips. I'm just going to snip each thread, making sure that I have plenty enough to tie it off with, but not so much that it makes it complicated. And I'm just going to single knot it, pull tight, and make sure that knot ends up down in between the layers of leather. I'm going to knot it one more time. And pull firm. I'm going to take thread snips and as close to the knot as I can, give it a snip. And then I'm going to work the leather back over to cover that little bump we've created from tying it off. Now I'm going to assess the edges and gently just pull to realign the black with the veg tan. You'll see that there might be the littlest difference, which we can absolutely shave off if needed, but it should match up to the edges. So we're just going to give it gentle manipulation to make it meet the edges again. And then our money clip is assembled. Next, we're going to be focusing on finishing our edges and giving it that nice glassy finish. So we're going to grab our tokenol and our wood burnisher. To finish the edge of our project, we're going to utilize these two things and friction. Now, there's a difference between pressure and friction. We're going to end up wetting the edge of the veg tan leather with the tokenol, and we're going to take the burnisher and use light friction to gloss up the edges. The friction and moisture interacts with the natural oils and tannins inside the leather to close the edge and take it from being rough, as you see now, and make it that glossy finished edge that you see on professional leather work. Since we're working with veg tan leather, once we get it wet, the leather becomes very supple and moldable. For example, we're just going to take this piece of leather, we're going to take our toconol, and we're going to apply it to the edge. So we're just wetting the edge. We're going to take our burnisher, and these notches in the burnisher correlate with different widths or thicknesses of leather. In leather speak, we call it different weights. Leather is measured by its weight in ounces per square foot, and whichever one of these grooves lines up is the one you should be using. You'll see me flip my burnisher around often, which is just the way that I do it. I'll use this tapered end on front edges to kind of curve them over. I'll mainly use this right here for the burnishing, but all I'm going to do is lightly allow friction to do its job and run the wood burnisher over the dampened leather without putting pressure on it. Just enough pressure to keep it firm against the leather, but then I'm just using friction. Now with that little bit of friction, we have taken the edge of the leather from this rough cut to this gloss shine, and that's just from a little bit of friction. As we burnish, it will darken your edge, and that's completely normal. So we're just going to take our project. Since this project utilizes two different types of leather, both chrome tan and veg tan, the act of burnishing will affect the veg tan leather. It will not affect the chrome tan. So don't be alarmed when the black leather does not start getting glossy like the veg tan. This leather will not and cannot be burnished. So we're just going to take some toconol, and we're going to work in small chunks, maybe 2 or 3 inches. So I'm just going to lightly run the toconol over the leather and try and saturate the edge evenly, and you'll see that the leather starts to darken as it hydrates. And we'll just take our burnisher and use friction and very light pressure running back and forth over our project, and you'll see it start to transform from that rough edge to the gloss edge you want. Now, when burnishing a project like this, it's very easy to create a weird little overhang with the leather as we burnish it, and that's when I switch to the tapered end to just burnish it down nice and flush. And even though you can't really burnish the black, I treat it the same way as I do the veg tan. Even though you can't burnish it, I like to keep it consistent and help them kind of meld together until my section that I had hydrated has that nice gloss on it. And then I'll just repeat that process on another section. Until the glossed portion takes up everything that we've applied toconol to. We'll just progress on. I'm being careful not to get the toconol on the finished surface of the leather. I don't want to get it anywhere but on this edge. So I'm just going to run it along, and I'm going to go over the corner a little bit and repeat. carefully focus on this corner. Corners are a little more difficult to burnish, and so I like to take my time, and I do tend to do it from both directions. And I have a tendency to switch to this tapered end to go over that corner and really get it, because it is hard to get the right amount of friction on a corner like that. And once you feel like it's glossed up, and we'll repeat that in a couple inch sections until we've done the entire outside edge of our project. And there we have it. You have successfully completed your veg tan money clip. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.